"Hans, I am surprised at you," said the miller. "Friendship never forgets. That is the wonderful thing about it. But I'm afraid you don't understand the poetry of life. How lovely your primroses are looking, by the by." "They are certainly very lovely," said Hans, "and it is a most lucky thing for me that I have so many. I'm going to bring them into the market and sell them to the burgomaster's daughter, and buy back my wheelbarrow with the money." "Buy back your wheelbarrow? You don't mean to say you've sold it? What a very stupid thing to do." "Well, the fact is," said Hans, "that I was obliged to. You see, the winter was a very bad time for me, and I really had no money at all to buy bread with. So I first sold the silver buttons off my Sunday coat, and then I sold my silver chain, and then I sold my big pipe, and at last I sold my wheelbarrow. But I'm going to buy them all back again now." "Hans," said the miller, "I will give you my wheelbarrow. It's not in very good repair. Indeed, one side is gone, and there's something wrong with the wheel spokes. But in spite of that, I will give it to you. I know it is very generous of me, and a great many people would think me extremely foolish for parting with it. But I'm not like the rest of the world. I think that generosity is the essence of friendship. And besides, I've got a new wheelbarrow for myself. Yes, you may set your mind at ease. I will give you my wheelbarrow." "Well, really, that is generous of you," said little Hans, and his funny round face glowed all over with pleasure. "I can easily put it in repair, as I have a plank of wood in the house." "A plank of wood?" said the miller. "Why, that's just what I want for the roof of my barn. There's a very large hole in it, and the corn will get all damp if I don't stop it up. How lucky you mentioned it. It's quite remarkable how one good action always breeds another. I've given you my wheelbarrow, and now you are going to give me your plank. Of course, the wheelbarrow is worth far more than the plank, but true friendship never notices things like that. Pray get it at once, and I will set to work at my barn this very day." "Certainly," cried little Hans, and he ran into the shed and dragged the plank out. "It's not a very big plank," said the miller, looking at it, "and I'm afraid that after I've mended my barn roof, there won't be any left for you to mend the wheelbarrow with. But of course that's not my fault. And now, as I have given you my wheelbarrow, I'm sure you would like to give me some flowers in return. Here's the basket. Mind you fill it quite full." "Quite full?" said little Hans rather sorrowfully, for it was really a very big basket, and he knew that if he filled it he would have no flowers left for the market, and he was very anxious to get his silver buttons back. "Well, really," answered the miller, "as I have given you my wheelbarrow, I don't think that it is much to ask you for a few flowers. I may be wrong, but I should have thought that friendship, true friendship, was quite free from selfishness of any kind." "My dear friend, my best friend," cried little Hans, "you are welcome to all the flowers in my garden. I would much sooner have your good opinion than my silver buttons any day." And he ran and plucked all his pretty primroses, and filled the miller's basket. "Good-bye, little Hans," said the miller, as he went up the hill with the plank on his shoulder and the big basket in his hand. "Good-bye," said little Hans, and he began to dig away quite merrily. He was so pleased about the wheelbarrow. The next day he was nailing up some honeysuckle against the porch when he heard the miller's voice calling to him from the road. So he jumped off the ladder and ran down the garden and looked over the wall. There was the miller with a large sack of flour on his back. "Dear little Hans," said the miller, "would you mind carrying this sack of flour for me to market?" "Oh, I am so sorry," said Hans, "but I'm really very busy today. I've got all my creepers to nail up, and all my flowers to water, and all my grass to roll." "Well, really," said the miller, "I think that, considering that I'm going to give you my wheelbarrow, it is rather unfriendly of you to refuse." "Oh, don't say that," cried little Hans. "I wouldn't be unfriendly for the whole world." And he ran in for his cap and trudged off with the big sack on his shoulders. It was a very hot day, and the road was terribly dusty, and before Hans had reached the 6th milestone he was so tired that he had to sit down and rest. However, he went on bravely, and at last he reached the market. After he had waited there some time, he sold the sack of flour for a very good price, and then he returned home at once, for he was afraid that if he stopped too late he might meet some robbers on the way. "It has certainly been a hard day," said little Hans to himself as he was going to bed, "but I am glad I did not refuse the miller, for he is my best friend, and besides, he's going to give me his wheelbarrow." Early the next morning the miller came down to get the money for his sack of flour, but little Hans was so tired that he was still in bed. "Upon my word," said the miller, "you are very lazy. Really, considering that I'm going to give you my wheelbarrow, I think you might work harder. Idleness is a great sin, and I certainly don't like any of my friends to be idle or sluggish. You must not mind my speaking quite plainly to you. Of course, I should not dream of doing so if I were not your friend. But what is the good of friendship if one cannot say exactly what one means? Anybody can say charming things and try to please and to flatter, but a true friend always says unpleasant things and does not mind giving pain. Indeed, if he is a really true friend, he prefers it, for he knows that then he is doing good." "I'm very sorry," said little Hans, rubbing his eyes and pulling off his nightcap, "but I was so tired that I thought I would lie in bed for a little time and listen to the birds singing. Do you know that I always work better after hearing the birds sing?" "Well, I'm glad of that," said the miller, clapping little Hans on the back, "for I want you to come up to the mill as soon as you are dressed and mend my barn roof for me." Poor little Hans was very anxious to go and work in his garden, for his flowers had not been watered for 2 days, but he did not like to refuse the miller, as he was such a good friend to him. "Do you think it would be unfriendly of me if I said I was busy?" he inquired in a shy and timid voice. "Well, really," answered the miller, "I do not think it is much to ask of you, considering that I'm going to give you my wheelbarrow, but of course, if you refuse, I will go and do it myself." "Oh, on no account!" cried little Hans, and he jumped out of bed and dressed himself and went up to the barn. He worked there all day long till sunset, and at sunset the miller came to see how he was getting on. "Have you mended the hole in the roof yet, little Hans?" cried the miller in a cheery voice. "It is quite mended," answered little Hans, coming down the ladder. "Ah," said the miller, "there is no work so delightful as the work one does for others." "It is certainly a great privilege to hear you talk," answered little Hans, sitting down and wiping his forehead. "A very great privilege. But I'm afraid I shall never have such beautiful ideas as you have." "Oh, they will come to you," said the miller, "but you must take more pains. At present you have only the practice of friendship. Some day you will have the theory also." "Do you really think I shall?" asked little Hans. "I have no doubt of it," answered the miller, "but now that you've mended the roof, you'd better go home and rest, for I want you to drive my sheep to the mountain tomorrow." Poor little Hans was afraid to say anything to this, and early the next morning the miller brought his sheep round to the cottage, and Hans started off with them to the mountain. It took him the whole day to get there and back, and when he returned he was so tired that he went off to sleep in his chair, and did not wake up till it was broad daylight. "What a delightful time I shall have in my garden," he said, and he went to work at once.